Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Diana Vasquez. I'm the BERDO Review Board Manager. The BERDO Review Board does not currently have an appointed chair, so I will lead us in a vote for acting chair. Does anyone on the board want to make a nomination for acting chair?
I nominate Lee Matsueda.
Thank you, Board Member O'Malley. Do you have a second?
Second.
Yes.
Thank you, Board Member Jacobs. I will now go down the line. How do you vote in terms of the nomination to have Board Member Matsueda serve as acting chair? Board Member Ellis?
Aye.
Board Member Jacobs?
The information. Aye. Aye.
Board Member Lattimore?
Aye.
Board Member Matsueda?
Yep, in favor.
Board Member Nelson?
In favor.
And Board Member O'Malley?
Aye.
Great. I will now share my screen and pass the meeting over to acting chair Matsueda.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Good to see you all. Welcome, members of the public. So I'm going to go ahead and call this public meeting to order at 4:35 p.m. In accordance with the Building Emissions Reduction and Disclosure Ordinance regulations adopted pursuant to the Building Emissions Reduction and Disclosure Ordinance, Boston City Code Ordinances Section 7-2.2. The BERDO Review Board will hold a virtual public hearing at 4:30 p.m. on February 12th to review the following topics in regards to the reduction of greenhouse gases from building energy production and consumption, so as to promote the public health and welfare of Boston residents. In accordance with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Executive Order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, we are conducting this public meeting online. To ensure public access to deliberations of the BERDO Review Board, the public may access this call through telephone and video conferencing. And members of the public will have an opportunity to ask questions and provide public comment. So to do so, you can raise your hand or type in the chat in the application via the Zoom meeting platform. If you're calling in and you can't use the platform, you can raise your hand by pressing *9. And you can also send questions to staff via email at BERDOReviewBoard, all one word, at boston.gov. So for the record, I am Lee Matsueda, acting chair of the board. I'm now going to conduct a roll call of board members. Board members, just please say your name in the order that they appear on the slide.
Stephen Ellis.
Lavette Jacobs. Gail Lattimore.
Lee Matsueda.
Jack Nelson.
Matt O'Malley.
All right, great. And now we will have our staff introduce themselves, please.
Diana Vasquez with the Environment Department.
Dima Mujahed with the Environment Department.
Darius Scripture-Bailey from the Environment Department.
Claudia Diaz Martinez, Environment Department.
I believe Hannah may be joining us a little late. She needs to pick up Isaac from daycare.
Thanks for that, Diana. And welcome, Darius. Glad to have you join us. Here is on the slide, we're going to see our agenda for today's meeting. As usual, we're going to start with the approval of our meeting minutes from the last meeting. Next, we're going to have the city team kind of demonstrate some of the new tools that they've developed, and then we'll move on to a discussion around the Equitable Emissions Investment Fund and a proposed project evaluation form. The city will cover administrative updates then, and we'll adjourn after that. Any questions about the agenda? Does that look right to everyone? All right. Excellent. So for our first agenda item, we are looking at board meeting minutes from January 8th, I believe, 2024. We need to approve these meeting minutes. So if there are any questions, are there any questions or comments regarding the meeting minutes before we take a motion? Okay. Hearing none. Is there a motion to approve?
Motion to
Motion to
approve.
approve.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. On the motion to approve our meeting minutes, board members in favor, please say aye or just show your hands. Both.
Aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions? I think so. And any opposed? I think that was everyone. Okay. The ayes have it. Our minutes have passed, and we'll make sure to share those through our website. Excellent. So let's move on here to the overview of some of the new tools that we have. There's, I think we've heard about both of these, the emissions calculator and the EJ mapping tool. So we're going to get some demonstration of these new tools from the BERDO team that they've developed. I think I'm just going to go ahead and pass it off to you, Dima.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so we have a very exciting new tool called the BERDO Emissions Calculator. This is a publicly available tool designed to assist building owners in viewing their emissions projections, evaluating and understanding their compliance. And there's also an accompanying guidance document that goes into some explanations and examples. Diana, do you mind if I share my screen so I can demo the calculator?
Yeah, go for it. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Where is it? Okay, there we go. Can everyone see that okay?
Yes, we see it.
Okay, awesome. All right, so basically this is what the BERDO calculator would look like when you open the link. Everything is, there's no populated numbers. This is, sorry, I don't know why it's getting me invalid. Okay, there we go. All right, so this is what it would look like. It's a blank page. And basically there's 3 sections of this. You can view your emissions projections for each compliance year based on the most recently reported energy data that you've given to the city. You can input some emission reduction projects, and you could also visualize, you could see a visual representation of your data. And what you would have to do to see that is input your BERDO ID here on the top left. I'll go with City Hall's BERDO ID, just to show you what it would look like. And everything populates now. So the left-hand side, there's some information like the building, square footage, use type, its energy use for the past year, and for 2022, I mean. And you can see that everything here populates with its emissions projections for each BERDO compliance year. There's things on there like your estimated emissions over or under the limit, and potential alternative compliance payments that you could make if you decide not to have any reduction projects, or you could also add emission reduction projects and see what your potential alternative compliance payment could be. Everything basically is dynamic and based off of your inputs. And then we have some charts in here. You can see a visual representation of your energy data, as well as alternative compliance payments with or without reductions. So I'll go ahead and input an emission reduction project so you could see. So City Hall runs on electricity and steam. And we can see here that electricity is the yellow stack, steam is the gray. And right now it's projected to be over its 2025 emissions limit. And its electricity usage is what's kind of bringing it over its limit, just from looking at this chart. So if I wanted to explore, for example, obtaining renewable energy such as solar, I could put that in here. And I could say the year that I want to implement this project, the fuel type that it would be mitigating its emissions from. So in this case, it would be electric. So I'd put that in here, and then on the left-hand side, we can see that the electric usage is about 10 million kilowatt hours. So let's say I'm aiming to mitigate that whole portion of it, the electricity emissions. I could just copy paste that in here. 10 million. And then I hit save. And you can see how everything adjusts from the chart to the table over here. So right now for 2025 to 2029, it would adjust and show you that you're about 1.8 million kgs of CO2 equivalent under your emissions limit. And projected, given nothing really changes with your energy use and this project, you could be under the limit for the next 3 emissions compliance increments. And you can also see that that adjusts your alternative compliance payments as well too. And there's a bunch of other things you can do. There's all the different types of fuels that you can mitigate. And also if you have basically you're replacing, let's say, steam, a fossil fuel system with an electric system, and that's going to add to the electric load. You could also add that electric load in here, but it's just a negative number that you would input to basically replace that load, I guess. I'll stop here for any clarifying questions.
Great, thanks, Ema. Yeah, let's just go through board members. Obviously, if you don't have any questions, you can pass them on. I'll just go down the list here. See if you have any clarifying questions for Dean. So, board member Boyd.
Board member Boyd is not.
Oh, that's right.
today.
Sorry. Board member Ellis.
Thank you, Acting Chair. Just a quick clarifying question, Dima, just to make sure. So the calculator would only be useful in terms of just looking at an individual building, not taking into account any building portfolios or ICS or any of those other sort of methodologies that folks might be employing, correct?
Yes, that's correct. Sorry, I didn't mention that at the top, but yes, this is basically just a single building use type as well as single building compliance.
Okay.
For
And
now, yeah.
got it. And so looking at the fields that I'm seeing here, just making sure I'm confirming everything here, all of this information that is on the left-hand side is coming majorly from Energy Star Portfolio Manager, correct?
Yes, this is the most recently reported energy data.
Okay. And last question, related to the renewable energy or an Energy Star Portfolio Manager, they refer to it as green power. I am just curious if a organization has submitted that their electricity was already being matched or is being covered by green power. Is this calculator taking that into account or is it not taking it into account, just out of curiosity?
I don't believe at the moment that it is. We're working on updating our BERDO reporting form as well to include reporting for renewable energy. So yeah, we're working on bringing that up to speed, but at the moment, no.
Okay, and just making sure. So Energy Star Portfolio Manager already has that function. So I'm more so asking independent of the reporting form. When one reports an Energy Star Portfolio Manager under electricity, they can essentially check off a box that says 100% of my energy for electricity has been matched by some renewable energy source. So that field, it doesn't look like that's being pulled into here. So one would have to recall or remember when they're using the calculator that they may need to re-add in that adjustment when it comes to electricity. I just wanted to put that out there for clarification purposes.
Okay, yeah.
All right, thank you. That's all.
Yes.
Great, thanks, board member Ellis. Board member Jacobs.
No questions at the moment.
Board member Lattimore.
Sorry, you may want to come back to me, but if I'm echoing, am I?
You're good actually right now.
Oh, okay. I'm in my office, but I haven't yet turned on my computer, so I wasn't able to see the presentation. I was listening because I was driving. But what I understand is that it is a tool that will help people if they put in certain types of energy efficiency methodologies, that it will help people understand what their potential reduction in greenhouse in emissions would be? Is that what I'm understanding?
So yes, in essence, but you could also, even without inputting some emission reduction projects, you could, if I remove this, you could still view basically where your emissions compliance looks like just based off projections and your
Okay,
most
so-
recently reported data. Yeah, but you could explore emission reduction projects and see how those could affect your future compliance.
Okay, and it's just an estimate. It's not to be kind of relied on for, or is it relied on for, is this the way the city is going to evaluate the emissions from buildings, or is it just a tool for informational purposes? Do you understand what I'm asking?
Well, emissions, why we say projections is because energy usage changes. And so these are for, 2025 to 2050. So that's why we use the term projections. But for the compliance years, those are calculated with the city's emissions factors, or with emissions factors, some based on Energy Star portfolio, some on the grid. And those are used on a yearly basis to determine compliance with BERDO. So this is more so a planning tool and a visualization tool for building owners or their consultants, or really anyone. It's a publicly available tool.
Okay, so it's a visualization and planning tool, but is not a tool that's going to be used by the city or relied on by the city for the actual emissions from buildings, or should be relied on by the property owner.
I don't. Yeah.
This is Hannah Payne. Sorry for joining late. I can answer that question. So it is just a planning tool. We'll be using the same math to determine compliance, but we won't be able to do that directly through the calculator tool because, as Dima said, we'll need the 2025 reported data and all of the things that go along with that, including the correct renewables reporting, any flexibility reporting. So the underlying math will be the same, but it will be a different, we'll have to look at other things for official.
Got it. Okay, thank you. I think I understand now. And so it'll be helpful when we start as a review board looking at, these things in real time, how, I'm sure, at least for me, it will come into better focus. So thank you. That's helpful. I don't have any other questions.
All right, thanks, Board Member Lattimore. And thanks, Anna, for that. I think my only question, so I think I know the answer to this, but maybe you can just help make sure. So if I'm searching a property, so there's some folks I work with, and I know they own their building downtown. And if it's not coming up, or I can find it, but like there's an error, is that an indication? I didn't have a chance to look deeper at whether or not they've actually filed, but is that a suggestion that they have not submitted any reports to date?
It could be. It also could be that they haven't claimed their building.
Okay.
It could also be that it's, yep.
And so if I wanted to find that out, I would need to go to the other tool and I could look up more information about their building, like would the EJ mapping tool have more information about the building?
It depends what you're looking for.
Yeah, so I think if you're looking for compliance information, I think the best publicly available information we have is on the disclosure that we did, which is published on Analyze Boston, but that is several months out of date now.
Right.
We're working on creating an updated map to be able to, like, in real time connect with our data and show a map of compliance. We've been having some challenges getting the connection of the data from our software to the city's warehouse. Complicated, don't need to go into the details. But so we don't have that at the moment, but we're working on it. So if you have a specific, I don't know that there's another way, but you can check within our system of whether the reporting's been completed. The owner of their building, if they've claimed their property in the BERDO reporting form, could go in and see what reporting years they're compliant with or not compliant with. But my guess is in this case that they have not completed reporting.
Thank you for that. I don't have any further questions. Board Member Nelson?
Thank you. I assume this tool is in real time and displays or is based on the latest accepted information from the building owners?
Yes, the most recently reported energy data.
Okay.
Yep.
And what emissions factors is utilized for electricity in the future? For
So-
future use.
So we actually have an accompanying calculator guide, and that, I don't know if that has the electricity emissions. It does, but
Does.
yeah, but there's also electricity projections that we have for the grid up to 2050. So that's what it's based on for electricity
Okay.
as a
And
backstop calculation. Sorry.
for context, sorry, Dima, just to add, those projected emissions factors were the ones that were used to determine the emission standards for BERDO in the first place, and they are also the backstop for future annual emissions factors. So the city will calculate annual grid electricity emissions factor, but if the actual emissions factor is bigger or larger than the projected one, we will use the projected one to have that backstop.
Okay. And how low does it get in 2050? Does it get to zero on those projected values?
Yes, if I'm not mistaken, I can double check
It
that.
doesn't. It gets
It
close,
doesn't?
but it's not
Okay.
all the way
It
to
doesn't
zero.
quite get there.
Yeah.
Okay.
But we again, that's the backstop. So per the regulations, we will be calculating an annual grid electricity emissions factor. So if that emissions factor based on real data from the grid is lower, that will be used for compliance. And I'd have to double check our regulations and policies, but I believe there's we also have something in there about when we'll update the projection or evaluate updating them, but I don't have that right in front of me at the moment.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Board Member Nelson, and thanks for the links that I see, Claudia, you're sharing here. Appreciate that. All right, Board Member O'Malley, please.
Yes, thank you. And first off, thank you to everyone who made this a reality. It's crucially helpful, and I think it's really allowing a lot of building owners to sort of plan things out. Obviously, what I love about BERDO is there is flexibility. There's no one answer. It allows for a building owner to employ a number of strategies at every 5-year increment to try to lower their emissions. So I'm curious, kind of along the lines of Board Member Nelson's question. With that drop down, or with the sort of second part of the web page, which allows for opportunities to lower your numbers, is it a drop down menu, or do you have to put in your own information?
For the emission reduction project or for the fuel
Yeah.
tank?
I couldn't.
I'm sorry, I can pull that up again, but for the
Yeah.
project, you can, I guess, name it whatever you want. It's the fuel type that you are mitigating that has the drop down, like if it's electricity or natural gas. Or
Yeah.
any
No,
other
that
type
makes
of-
sense. No, that makes sense. I don't think I'm asking the question the right way. One thought, and here's where I'm going with this as it relates to sort of, like electricity and emissions factors. Is it worth it? And I'm not looking to put more work on anyone or reinventing the wheel, but is it worth it to show how opting up to 100% renewable through community choice energy could play a role in emission reduction factors as like one of a drop down thing? I would think that should be relatively easy to do, and it could be a way to sort of get folks thinking.
So that is a little text box that we can't really recommend a specific type of flexibility measure or compliance mechanism, but it's kind of in a little, I'll share my screen right now.
Yeah, no, I'm not suggesting we recommend anything. I think, as I mentioned, having the flexibility, but if you, oh, that's exactly what I was thinking of, and I'm sorry I didn't see that, but that's highlighting that first is a good way to, I think, help folks, because I think this is a very daunting task for many folks. And sadly a lot of people aren't realizing it, but it shows the way that we can make an impact right away. So that's good. So kudos to whoever had the foresight to put that in. And those are all the questions I have for now, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Board Member O'Malley. Any other clarifying questions or other comments or questions people from the board would like to offer?
I would just ask, excuse me, I just came onto my computer in my office. Can you put the link to that emissions piece back in the chat? I think I don't see it since I just came on.
Sure, the calculator.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Anna. Yeah, I think the only comment I have in addition is just I'm thinking through kind of what you were sharing, Board Member O'Malley, is just like how to make that project section as user friendly as possible and easy to use. And I don't exactly have great recommendations here, but I'm just trying to imagine some of the folks that I know who might be trying to get on here, and I think they might be challenged by this particular section, like figuring out they're just throwing numbers out there, right? And so it would be good to list out maybe this is already existing somewhere, but just some resources that people could kind of go to help help them make sure they can come up with some good numbers that seem realistic based on whatever fuel they'd be switching to or however. So that's the only piece. I'm not sure if that's clear, but that it just feels potentially challenging for folks to use that particular portion of the tool. All right. Any other comments or questions from members of the board?
And this can be taken offline later, but just out of curiosity, is this calculator taking into account the fact that, the first batch of buildings that will need to be in compliance by 2025 are different from the latter batch of buildings? Because I'm wondering, if you have a smaller property and you put your information in here, you might get concerned that, wait a minute, should I be getting ready to pay alternative compliance payments, even though their property size might actually be smaller? So that's just I'm playing around with the calculator right now as you're speaking, so forgive me, more questions might come up later, but I just wanted to know about that part.
No, that's a good flag for us as well. Ideally, you would know when you are subject to the BERDO emissions the first year. So that is a good flag for us, that just, anyone that may not know to not panic if they see that they're out of compliance in 2025 when really their first year is 2030.
And it's something we've been talking to our software developers about. So I'll check in on the status of that because I know we raised it with them.
Thank you.
And just to also be clear, so is this currently available, both the guide and the calculator, or it's already live, correct?
Yes.
Okay, great. Are you able to tell if people are actually using it?
Unless they tell us no.
No, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, any last questions or comments from members of the board? And then I think we have another important tool that I think we want to hear more about.
Just briefly, Mr. Chair, I want to follow up on Board Member Ellis's question because I think it's an excellent one. Board Member Ellis, I assume you're talking about smaller size buildings that wouldn't be triggered. Yeah, I would think that I'm no software engineer, so please take this with a mountain of salt, but I would think that they could have some sort of a catch-all during the search function on square footage, which would have a little pop-up or would have, a column null and void saying this won't take effect till 2030 if you're 25,000 or 30,000 square feet or smaller.
Yes, we'll definitely follow up with them on it. I thought they had already incorporated some of that, so I just need to double check to see where some of those updates stand.
Right. Thanks, Hannah.
All right, thank you, Dima. Thank you for walking us through that, and Hannah as well for answering some questions. I think we have our third agenda item we're going to move on to, and this is the Equitable Emissions Investment Fund. So for more specifically, we're going to.
Oh, sorry, Chair. I think we're covering the environmental justice map tool.
Oh, I'm sorry. I completely went ahead.
No worries.
Thanks for catching that. That was the other tool that I said was so important, and I just went right over it. So Darius, I think you're helping us out with this. My apologies, everyone. Got ahead of myself. So yes, please, Darius, why don't you jump ahead and we'll get to the EJ mapping tool.
Chair, I'll actually start with some pre-guidance before
Okay.
Darius jumps in.
Sure.
Sorry, thank you for all those questions with the calculator. I think it's very helpful, and also feel free to, we'll have the same for this environmental justice mapping tool. So we have already released a BERDO environmental justice map tool and a how-to guide to help building owners use this mapping tool. And here I just wanted to first explain the context of that guide and walk you through the different types of data that you'll be able to find in the mapping tool. And then Darius will help us with a demonstration on how to use the map live. So here you can see how the how-to guide looks like, and it has three main components. The first one is describing the different layers or metrics that are included in the mapping tool. Then it guides users on how to interpret the data that it's contained in each layer. And finally, it guides users on how to produce maps that are required for some building portfolio applications and emission standard compliance plans. And I'll provide a reminder on that point today as well. Next slide, please. So first, who can use this mapping tool? Who's the intended audience? So this mapping tool can be used by anyone, including building owners, Boston residents, the general public, to identify where where BERDO buildings are located, regarding to environmental justice communities and how they are exposed to different environmental stressors that are of importance to environmental justice. However, using this tool is required for some building portfolios, as you might remember from our conversations for regulations. As a reminder, any building portfolio that contains any of the following will need to use this tool. So building portfolios that have on-site campus district energy system or on-site combined heat and power plants that use non-renewable energy and that are located in environmental justice populations, any building portfolio with industrial or manufacturing buildings located in environmental justice populations, energy and power station buildings in environmental justice population, and building portfolios that have a combination of residential buildings inside and outside environmental justice populations, or a combination of deed-restricted residential buildings and other residential buildings. And just as a reminder, for example, a building portfolio that only has buildings located inside environmental justice populations would not be required to have this mapping tool. It's only if you have the combination inside and outside environmental justice populations. The same thing goes to, for example, building portfolios that are only deed-restricted residential buildings. They would not be required to produce a map for their application. It's only if they have this combination of deed-restricted and other residential buildings. Owners of these types of building portfolios will be required to produce a building portfolio map at 3 points or milestones of their building portfolio. First, when they are applying to the review board for the approval of their building portfolio. Second, when they're submitting their first emission standard compliance plan. This will be done 2 years after their building portfolio is approved. And finally, when submitting any subsequent update to their building portfolio emission standard compliance plan. Again, so this is required for these cases, but anyone else can use the tool just to explore data related to BERDO and environmental justice. Next slide, please. So what metrics are included in the map? This BERDO environmental justice mapping tool includes 5 layers in total. You can think of layers as different slices of the map that contain information related to a specific metric or collection of data. And these layers can be turned on and off from the map, so you can see different visual representations of these metrics. So for example, here we have a screenshot of the layer called BERDO buildings, and it shows the tax parcels that have BERDO buildings inside them. Yeah, and you can see it's shaded where there's BERDO buildings. So that's a layer of the map. Next slide, please. So now I'll go to explain each of the 5 layers in the map, how they're called, how they're represented in the map, and where we get the data for these different metrics. So the first layer is BERDO buildings. You can see here in Alston Brighton, it shows tax parcels that contain BERDO buildings that are shaded, and you can see they're transparent so that we can overlay these BERDO buildings with other layers, and we'll see that later today. The metric is simply the buildings that are covered by BERDO according to the City of Boston's assessing department and the BERDO covered buildings list. So this is data that comes directly from the city. Next slide, please. The second metric or layer is the Massachusetts environmental justice populations. This layer maps the neighborhoods of the City of Boston that meet one or more of the definition criteria for environmental justice populations according to the definition that we have at the level of the Commonwealth. This data is mapped at a census tract level, and it shows not only who meets the definition of environmental justice population, but which criteria they are meeting. So you can see here there's different levels of blue that I use to signal if a specific census tract meets one or more of the criterion and which criteria they're meeting. The environmental justice population definition has 3 main criteria that are related to income, race and ethnicity, and language isolation. So for example, here we have the layer of environmental justice populations overlaid with the BERDO buildings layer in Alston Brighton. And I have here, for example, a building that is marked in red. So this BERDO building, because it's in a darker blue, it means that it means the 3 criteria of minority, income, and English isolation. The data source for this particular layer is the Massachusetts Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. Next slide, please. So the next metric is asthma prevalence. This is specifically related to asthma prevalence among adults that are age 18 or older, and the data is also mapped at the census tract level. In a nutshell, asthma prevalence means what is the proportion of a population that has experienced asthma for a given time period. So it provides a snapshot of a population. So this is just like a photograph or who suffer from asthma in Boston at a particular period in time. In this map, different levels of green show the levels of asthma prevalence in Boston from the lighter green to the darker green. So for example, in this image, we have a red BERDO building sort of in the lower side of Brighton, and it has a sort of medium green, so it has a moderate asthma prevalence level. The data source for this layer is the CDC, and this is also the data source that is used for the US EPA EJ screening tool. Next slide, please. The next metric that we have is the Urban Heat Island Intensity Index. This basically maps how the urban heat island effect is experienced across the city of Boston. It shows the differences in temperatures that would be experienced in Boston in a model heat wave. So basically you see different colors that show the temperature differences between that point of Boston versus the coolest point in the city, which is located around Franklin Park. So these particular layers shows different colors from blues and greens to yellows and reds. So the red is the highest urban heat island effect and the blue is the lowest urban heat island effect. Just to clarify, all of Boston is an urban heat island, like many cities, because we have higher density of buildings, pavement, asphalt, darker roofs. The whole city of Boston absorbs and releases more heat than surrounding rural areas. So it's not that there's areas of the city that don't suffer from the urban heat island effect, but the impacts are different depending on the level of vegetation, pavement, and development. So for example, you can see the area around the Chestnut Hill Reservoir in the south of Brighton has lighter blues. That's because there's more vegetation in that area, so there's less of an urban heat island effect. While buildings that are, for example, along Commonwealth Avenue have more moderate levels of the urban heat island effect. And the data source for this layer is from the city of Boston, from the climate ready map that we produced a couple of years ago. And I think this is the last metric that we have. This is the respiratory hazard. This represents specifically the air toxics respiratory hazard index across the city of Boston. A hazard index essentially represents the potential adverse health effects that would be caused by a combination of air pollutants that we're exposed to. This is also mapped at the census tract level. In general, if you have a hazard index that is equal to or less than 1, it means that the air toxic levels that are present are unlikely to cause adverse health effects. All of the respiratory hazard index values that we have in Boston are below 1, but there's also different levels that are experienced across the city, and this is what that map would show with different levels of orange and yellow. So for example, the red building that we have here is sort of in the medium color, so it has a high hazard index compared to the rest of Boston. The data source for this metric is the CDC as well, and this is also the same data that is used for the EPA's environmental justice screening tool. And now I'll give the podium to Darius so he can demonstrate how to use this map.
Darius, would you like to share your screen?
Yeah, definitely. One second. Let me pull it up here. All right. Let's see. Is that viewable?
Yes, we can see it.
Awesome. Okay. So this is the tool. This is the map tool that and this is the first screen that you'll come to when you open it up. It'll have this sort of big blue drop-down box here, as the city of Boston, the title, and this is just a brief overview. You know, it tells you what to find and where to find it. So you have a search bar in the top left, where you can input a specific BERDO ID or address. There's also in the bottom left, you'll see a list of map layers and a toolbar with a print button. On the right side over here, you'll see a legend. There's nothing in the legend right now because there's no layers that have been checked. At the bottom right, you also see zoom. So this will zoom in, zoom out, and then a home button. The home button will return you back to the original view of the map. We also have a button down here, which will help you send an email to the BERDO Review Board at boston.gov with questions about the use function of the map. So just to get started, I'll close this piece and I'll open up the map tool overall. Just to sort of give you an idea of the kinds of things that you'll see. I'll just turn on some of the layers. So this is the BERDO building layer, and it will populate with all of the, as was shown earlier, all of the parcels that have BERDO buildings on them. We can add to that the environmental justice populations, the asthma prevalence, the urban heat island effect, and finally the respiratory hazard index. So as you can see, you can overlay all of these with the BERDO buildings so that you can see, even when you have the BERDO building on, what color is underneath. So let's say you had a building in mind that you wanted to find out more about. So let's use City Hall as an example. I'll go, oops. And we'll click on in the search bar and it'll bring us right to City Hall. Now, let's say I want to mark City Hall so that I can see it even when I zoom out. I look at this toolbar and there's a draw a point tool right here. So I click that, and this is your chance to get creative. But for now, we can just do this red little marker here, and we'll put it right here onto City Hall. As you can see, there's also a little thing here to change the size. There's plenty of options that you can go through and for different types of markings. But I think we'll keep it simple and probably the way to go here. And if I click there and I say use the home button to look at the default map view, there you can see it marks the building where it was. Now, just to get an idea of where how the map would look overall, let's take let's go to a different city building. In 10 Mass Ave. And let's say I want this to be purple. All right, and then return back. So now, as you can see, we have two buildings marked on the map, one down here and one over here. And now we get to start the process of looking at how those buildings look or look as compared to the different layers. So if we turn on the environmental justice population layer, you can see one of these buildings is in a light blue, one of them is in a sort of a medium blue. So both of them are in environmental justice communities, but differing types. And so let's say I want to save this image here. I can go to the print button and then just press print. It'll take a little bit of time to load, but hopefully there we go. All right, and then it'll click up, or it'll become a link here, and then you can open that link and it'll give you the end map. It'll retain the legend down here. It'll retain the markers you put. And this is what we hope that building owners will be using when they send us their applications for a portfolio, just to make sure that we can tell where in the city their buildings are vis-a-vis these various environmental justice criteria. If you want to change it, you can just reset, make your additions, make your changes. Let's go to respiratory hazard, do the same thing here, and it'll pop up. I will note that there is no base map at the final printed version. That is a bug that we're still kind of trying to work on, but at the very least, we have the parcels and the colors in there so that we know whether it is or is not in a area of importance. The one thing that I cannot show you, unfortunately, is this beautiful Get Help button. And that is because I cannot download an email map to my work computer. But suffice to say, when you click this, it'll automatically open an email app on whatever device you're using and pre-populate the subject line with just a subject that'll let the people in the managing the inbox know that this is a question about specifically the environmental justice tool, and then you can just type in your question there as well. Yeah, and if you want to clear, I just forgot to say, if you want to clear all of these, you've made a bunch of these fun little drawings, you want to clear it, just press this button right here, it says clear all, and then keep going. All right, and yeah, that's all that I have to talk about as far as the demonstration.
All right. Thanks, Darius. Appreciate that. Thank you from Claudia for um, yeah, helping just give some context and background there. I guess, yeah, similarly, we can just see if board members once again have just any comments or questions about the tool. And I'll start with you, board member O'Malley. We'll go bottom up this time. So board member O'Malley, any comments or questions that you have?
Just a laudatory comment, and thank you, Darius. Good to meet you virtually. This was a great overview. You know, the mantra of the first BERDO back in 2013 was what gets measured gets managed. That's what former Chief Brian Sweat coined at a council hearing on why we were doing this. And so to have this level of data literally down by the parcel view is just really important, and it also underscores why we're doing this work. So this is great. I have not yet played around with this. I'm glad it's a snow day tomorrow in the city of Boston because it'll give me some time to play with this. But great job all around. Kudos.
Great. Board member Nelson.
Yeah, just great tool, great work. Can you imagine trying to implement BERDO in it not being the internet age? I just can't imagine it. So good job.
Yeah, no, I mean, I started to play around with this. If there are blank sections, like on this map, for example, with the respiratory hazard, I would assume there are respiratory hazards in some of those unmarked areas, but is it because there's just no data for those neighborhoods?
Yeah, so it's CDC data based on the census tract level, and there are a couple of possible reasons. Most of the time, they don't give data on census tracts. They don't have enough like raw data for them. There are other reasons why, but it's basically the blank portions are because there's no CDC or EPA data for it.
Yep. I am curious, were there other layers considered when you thought about the tool, including other layers? I don't know if would fit, but like, for example, maybe like flood risk or something like that. Like I know, these obviously have some direct connection to key, health issues, but just curious, were there any other layers that you all entertained including on this map or that we've seen in other EJ tools?
I can jump on that. Yeah, this is something that we discussed during the regulations process. So I know there were comments, for example, to include maps on energy burdens, but we couldn't find data that was official and uniform enough to include at this point. The city of Boston does have climate resilience map that were not included here, but there is that information available through other tools in terms of flooding risks and sea level rise as well.
The only other last comment I had is, so how how often, I guess, so all this data, there are different sources for all of this. For the EJ data in particular, population data, can you tell me do we know how often that gets updated?
Go ahead, Darius.
It's census data, or it's based off of census data.
Yeah.
And so it's updated every decade.
Every 10 years.
Unfortunately, it would be nice if we had a better sort of source to update it more regularly. And I'm sure that there are ways out there and means to do it. But at the moment, as far as this map goes, it's this like decade every decade census data.
Yep. Okay, that's all I got. Board Member Lattimore?
Thank you. Yeah, I had some of the questions that you asked Lee about. So I was surprised to see like in particular asthma respiratory issues being a little less dense in Dorchester than darker than what I would have thought. And just curious, I mean, I know you're looking at EPA data and maybe they don't have data at the census tract level. I thought Boston Public Health Commission, I assume, but I assume that their data is not census block level data, because I know I've seen some of their reports over the last, say, 2 or so years ago that had quite a bit of data that I thought was very granular.
Yeah,
Just
they're
curious.
yeah,
Mhm.
they do have different sort of metrics related to asthma and other health issues, but they are not updated as often, or we could not rely that they would be updated.
I see.
So this data is based on census tract data, but something it is regularly updated based on the estimates that the US Census Bureau releases every year. So there is more likelihood that this will be continued data that will be available over time.
Got it. Thank you. I think it's a very useful tool. So thank you. Appreciate it. No more questions.
Sorry, I was on mute. Board Member Jacobs, please.
No questions at the moment.
Okay. Board Member Ellis?
Yes, thank you. This is quite interesting to see finally coming to fruition, and I appreciate the presentation, especially the how-to guide. I found myself going through that, and a couple of questions so far that had been answered regarding the fact that, you know, building owners would need to submit in a layer, every single layer for the buildings is what I'm understanding so far. I will admit I have some concerns about legibility with a map like this for building owners that have clusters of buildings that are relatively close to one another, and seeing whether or not you can actually see what you need to evaluate. And so based on what Darius, thank you for presenting earlier, it looks like a building owner could zoom in to an area to perhaps be utilized by the city and the review board. I do have a question regarding the application process when a building owner submits for a building portfolio and these maps come with it. Forgive me, it's been a minute, but how are we using this information? You know, I know that we're asking them to submit this information, but what is the city and what is the board expected to do with that information? Are we looking for content about how they'll be addressing EJ concerns? I'm just seeking a reminder right now.
Yes, I can jump on that. So in terms of building portfolio applications, owners will be asked to describe in their emission standard compliance plan how they are distributing the benefits that are produced by BERDO throughout their buildings included in a building portfolio. So an owner could explain, for example, I have these 5 buildings. I know 3 of them are located in environmental justice population that are disproportionately exposed to higher asthma prevalence, for example. So I am prioritizing these buildings, and it also aligns with my capital planning, and those systems are the oldest ones anyway, so it makes sense for it. And the review board could assess, are they distributing those benefits equitably within reason, right? If, for example, a building that is located in an environmental justice population has a new boiler that was just updated last year, it might not make sense for the building owner to retrofit or replace that system first, even if it's in a environmental justice population. So it will be in the review board's discretion whether that planning of different emissions reduction effort is being equitably distributed across environmental justice populations and in consideration of all of these other metrics. I don't know if that was clear enough.
No, that's perfectly clear. Thank you for the reminder. So realistically, it's about scalability based on where the sort of pins an individual places on the map. I did have similar questions to Chair Masuda as well as Board Member Lattimore regarding the maps and the how current the information are. I would recommend that in the how-to guide that you perhaps include a column that stayed last updated so that folks know. I do get the sense that, and I just want to make sure I'm understanding that you're saying the majority of it is from census data, but some of those layers are not related to census information at all. And so I'm just recommending that you put when was it last updated so that when folks are looking at these, they can get a sense of, wait, why is my community not represented here? Or why is this not representing my own personal understanding of my immediate communities? So I would just recommend adding that to the how-to guide so that folks know when was the last time this information was updated. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you. That's a good point. I think we can add that.
Great, thanks, Board Member Ellis, and thanks, Claudia. And Darius, any final questions or comments from members of the board before we move on to our next agenda item? Okay. Yeah, as others have already said from the board, like good, really, thank you. I know it's a ton of work that goes into creating and designing these tools so that they can be as functional and useful and easy to use as possible. And so I'm kind of eager to see what we get when we get those, you know, applications in, how folks are using them. Obviously curious to hear from staff if you all are getting a lot of calls about these tools and needing additional support. But obviously great work to get us going. Thanks for the briefing and the ability to kind of walk us through them. And I think many of us will kind of continue to kind of play around with them. Appreciate that. All right, so now, as I jumped ahead earlier, we're going to switch gears to the Equitable Emissions Investment Fund at this moment. So we have heard about this before. There is a proposed project evaluation form and the process around all of this. So we're going to let Diana kind of walk us through.
Yes, I can walk us through this section. So quickly, I just wanted to provide a refresher around the Equitable Emissions Investment Fund. So it is a new fund born out of BERDO that shall be expended for the support, implementation, and administration of local building carbon abatement projects. So buildings located within the city of Boston, and fund expenditures shall prioritize projects that benefit environmental justice populations. I will not read every single bullet point here, but this is what is written in the ordinance, and so that is the purpose of the fund. Currently, the fund has been seeded with $3.5 million from the mayor, and going forward, the fund will be filled with alternative compliance payments. So, if a building owner wish to get into compliance using alternative compliance payments, those payments will go directly into the Equitable Emissions Investment Fund. And so then that fund will then go back into the community via local carbon abatement projects. And the BERDO Review Board will review project proposals, make recommendations for expenditures, and set conditions for expenditures. And just again, another refresher on the eligibility. So any building owner or resident located in the city of Boston or entity acting on behalf of Boston Buildings. And then in terms of funding decisions, just reiterating that the review board will present the project. Sorry, this is actually why we're doing this. So in our regulations, we wrote that the review board will present the project review form for comment at a public hearing and shall use the project review form to inform funding decisions. And then lastly, for refresher, you may all remember in the regulations process, we listed out different criteria that we thought would be important to consider when evaluating projects being submitted for the Equitable Emissions Investment Fund. So the only one that is absolutely required is an emissions reductions component. So there must be an emissions reductions component within a building within the city of Boston. And then the other criteria include benefits to affordable housing, benefits to tenants, benefits to labor and workforce development, benefits to outdoor air quality, benefits to indoor air quality and quality of life, climate resilience benefits, energy justice benefits, and then another category that the review board, may have discretion over. So this is the draft evaluation form. Sorry, it's a little bit, the text is a little small, but review board members, you should have this also in your folders if you wanted to see it in a larger format. You can see here we have each criteria listed, and on the second row, we have them listed from highly advantageous, advantageous, not advantageous, and then not present, because we can recognize that some of these, for example, benefits to affordable housing may not be applicable to all projects that would be submitted. And we did propose more of a qualitative approach. So this highly advantageous, advantageous, not present approach over a quantitative approach. Truthfully, because we believe it gives a more holistic approach to evaluating projects. We didn't want to propose something that had a cutoff score, for example, knowing that different projects may be very unique, could offer very different benefits to the community. So we thought that a qualitative approach could be more holistic in evaluating these projects. We think they're better at capturing intangible aspects that a project could bring to a community, better for allowing contextualization, and flexible and adaptable to new information. I'm sure there will be some things that we have not thought of yet that could be submitted via these application processes. So I'm just gonna go back really quickly. I'll just read the first row to give an example of what is listed. So for the emissions reduction section or criteria for highly advantageous, it would be a project proposal where building emissions reductions are clearly defined, expected timeline and scale are clearly outlined, and are realistic. For an advantageous scoring, it would be a project proposal that has building emissions reductions that are mentioned, but timeline and scale maybe are unclear or results are moderate emissions reductions. For not advantageous, a project that has building emission reductions that are limited, and then not present building emissions reductions are not mentioned in their project proposal. And it follows a similar beat for the rest of the criteria. So with this in mind, this is the proposed process staff would like to make to the review board. After a submission period closes, so after we open a fund submission period and we receive all the applications, each board member will receive their own personal individual packet, including a summary and full applications of those submitted, in addition to a personal spreadsheet with this evaluation form and evaluation criteria for personal notes. And at a subsequent meeting, we would come together and discuss each project based on personal notes. And then ultimately there would be either we would decide in that meeting if we had enough consensus to make a vote on funding decisions, or the board could decide you want more time. So that would be the subsequent process. And then if the board agrees, we can move forward publicly sharing this project evaluation form for any public input or board feedback if you decide that you have some feedback that you would like to include. And then we can present any revisions made at an upcoming meeting in March. That was a very quick overview. So please, board, I'll hand it over back to you.
Great, thanks for that, Diana. Yeah, so let's hear from board members again. Just any questions or comments. I'll start with you, board member Ellis, and go through the list again. So please, any comments or questions?
Immediate question or comment off the cuff, and I admit that I haven't fully come up with all my questions yet, but specific to the application, are we not asking for projected funds in the application? Is that what I'm understanding?
Projected funds in terms of what they are applying for?
That's correct.
I believe we can put that in the application form.
Yeah.
I just don't think it'll be something that is in like the evaluation criteria, one of the evaluation criteria.
I see. So sort of that would be independent of for the time being, essentially. Okay. I'll see if I have any more questions at the end. I'll pause for now. Thank you.
Thanks, board member Ellis. Board member Jacobs.
No questions at the moment.
Board member Lattimore.
Yeah, I mean, I think board member Ellis's question is a good one about, like, as we're making decisions about rather to make affirmative or not on the request for the equitable emissions fund dollars, will we know kind of a couple of things, the not only the amount that they're looking for, but also the amount of work required to do a specific decarbonization project? Because it would seem to me that we would need to know that in order to make rational decisions about, like, okay, well, if somebody has a $50,000 project, but they're asking for all of that from the equitable emissions fund, or 30,000 of that. Does that assume that they have the rest, so that we know? And then I'm also wondering about the ability to understand, or maybe this is not appropriate, but just determine what type of decarbonization is going to get the biggest bang for the buildings, for the buck. You know what I mean? Like, is it going to, is it like, I assume people aren't going to ask for things like, oh, give me some money for weather stripping, which I'm not saying can't help, but you want to get some bang for your buck in the emissions and level. So how are we trying to figure that out, or is that going to come as part of the summary? And then I'm just going to ask a couple of questions and then stop. The tenant safeguards, I'm just wondering about how I need to go back and look at the chart for the tenant piece, how we make decisions in a way that, I know how stuff goes. Sometimes you put in what you think you're going to do in terms of safeguarding tenancies, and then you get the money, and a year or so later, the tenants are gone. So, just trying to figure those things out. Those are my comments and questions. I don't know if you captured all of them. Sorry, I didn't pause.
I think I can answer to some. I think I can respond to some of them. I actually see Claudia included the regulations in the chat, but we can certainly ask. Oops, sorry. We can certainly ask in the application form for more details that are not included in the evaluation project, in the project evaluation form. But this is more so to give folks who are interested in applying an idea of what as the review board and what we're looking for in terms of like potential proposals. And we can certainly also develop guidance materials and more sort of assistance to folks who may be interested in applying, so that they get a clear vision.
Mm-hmm.
I'll go ahead, Claudia.
I just wanted to add, thank you. In terms of emissions reductions, the regulations do say that you can consider different types of metrics related to that. For example, the reviewer may consider comparing absolute emissions reductions that a project is expected to have, or they could use the expected emissions reduction per dollar of the fund that would be granted. So definitely the reviewer could decide what are the metrics that make more sense in a given application cycle, and go more granular than the evaluation criteria, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And any thoughts about the tenant piece? I mean, I'm assuming that, if one of their application points is they're going to try to support tenants in some way, maintain, how do we, do we just trust that, or how do we verify? Do you have thoughts on that? Or has that been thought through? I'm sorry if I read something, but I'm just curious about that.
No, it's a good question. So as part of conditions to receive funding, I think we have standard conditions that are related to reporting. So depending on the benefits that an applicant has promised through a project, the reviewer could set reporting requirements related to those benefits. So this is what we would want to see to make sure that these tenant benefits you mentioned are being realized. So we don't have like a list of metrics, because I think that will vary a lot project by project, but the reviewer has the ability to set those reporting requirements so that they can monitor if the impacts of the fund.
That would be good, I think, to link the at least for those who get money from the emissions fund, links there have some nuances in their reporting requirements like that. Thank you.
And one of the conditions that we're including in the regulations is that the reviewer could decide to grant the money in phases. So for example, oh, I want to see this result before giving you the second amount of money. That's also that the reviewer has the discretion to decide.
Thank you. No more questions.
Thanks, Board Member Lattimore. Yeah, it was important for me to look at the regulations as I was thinking about this. So thanks for sharing that link. Because yeah, there is a bunch of other information that we will be gathering, so that's helpful. I think one thing that stood out to me that doesn't fit the rubric that we have right now around the benefits, but seems important when evaluating applications is sort of like the level of engagement and support for the project, right? And so, right, an individual building owner could submit this, and you know, it would mean more to me at first. This is just off the top of my head. If they've done work to engage a number of different stakeholders and in both figuring out the project, but also getting support for it from folks that would be impacted by it. So I don't know how to actually think about that. Obviously, the building owner, right? There's a discretion, right, that they have to obviously meet these goals, and at the same time, I'm just thinking about how the who of like who supports the project and how is that demonstrated does carry value to me, and be interested to know if there's a way to kind of incorporate that into either the application. Doesn't have to be the rubric itself, because I think that form is helpful as it is. But I am starting to think about the other factors on how you compare and make a decision about this. And I think there's definitely more conversation here, even just, you know, how the conditions like on release, I think that's a good idea. And it's helpful to kind of take some time to think through that, right? So it's a lot of energy and resources that go into doing really good. This is not, I guess it's kind of like grant making, right? And in order to do that with strong values and direction, it's you got to really put a lot of thought into it. So appreciate the initial thought that's been put in, and just wanted to point out the one thing about how do we get better sense of like who else is supporting and involved in this project.
Yeah, and an idea we haven't produced like a draft application for the fund, sorry, but we were considering having a space where owners could attach letters of support from tenants and from other organizations. So I think that would be great.
And that will also ask for plans and specifications for that proposed project too, correct?
Correct.
Board Member Nelson, continue. If there are any other questions or comments, please. And then
Do the applicants make a request for a certain amount of funding, or is that just up to the board to determine how much they may contribute towards a specific project?
I can jump in. So in the regulations, one of the information that would be required from applicants is the total amount of funding that is requested and a description of how that funding would be used for the project.
So I guess one of the metrics we could use is what the requested dollar value is divided by the number of M-pounds that might be reduced in CO2 as a result. And then we can compare projects, using that metric. Because I do like your attempt to take all the different criteria and try to move it from subjective to objective, so we can actually give each criteria a rating. So I think a metric where we have a dollar value per M-pound reduced is something that, would be a responsible value for us to evaluate. That's all I have. Thanks.
all right, thanks, Board Member Nelson. Board Member O'Malley.
Yeah, first off, appreciate underscoring us looking at this through a qualitative lens as opposed to a quantitative lens. I think that's important given the complexity of these things. I would echo some comments from my fellow board members in terms of including some language about community support, whether that's an opportunity for letters of support. I know at the CPA fund, or I believe you used to need a sign off from your city councilor. I'm not saying we make it overly complicated, but I certainly think, the city does this in a number of ways. CPA funds are allocated this way. The Brown funds are allocated in a little less transparent way, but still a public process. So I think that we can, it might behoove us and certainly the Environment Department to check in with some colleagues in other city departments that allocate public funds through a public process to see what we could be doing better, which what they wish they were doing, and we can implement it there as we come up with the criteria. And then the last point, someone else had mentioned this, I think, on a prior meeting. I think it's also important to have on the application process a question that ascertains whether or not an applicant is seeking other public funds for this project. There's a tremendous amount of federal funds. There are state funds available. So that's something that and I'm not saying it makes a application more or less likely that we'll fund, but it'll certainly inform a lot of our thinking. And I think it's relevant as we think about some of the public good that can come from these projects.
Thank you, Board Member O'Malley. Any other comments or questions from the board? I think this is we are going to have an opportunity. Well, let me just ask that. Yeah, it looks like Board Member Ellis, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. One first clarification point. During the application process, because I'm not sure I'm understanding this from the regulation, does the applicant submit the criterions that they believe the project would meet? Meaning, obviously, there's an emission reduction expectation, but are they going to be submitting for, some of the other two, whether it's related to tenants or related to outdoor air quality? And that might help narrow down what we would need to be focusing on the evaluation form. So that's my first question.
I can jump into that one. So I think that's addressed by asking for a narrative of how the project would provide benefits to environmental justice populations or advance the purpose of the ordinance, which I know it's very vague, I think, in the application form. But it is what we are referring to that's those criteria. So I think in the application form, we can make it more simple and direct, where we're asking, like, select which benefits you think you will provide and explain how, why.
Perfect.
So that it's a clear connection.
Okay, so then I trust that will be translated when board members receive the evaluation form, number one. Number two, my other comment is that related to what board member Lattimore was bringing up regarding sort of tenants and evaluation for tenants, I personally think that the evaluation form may need to have an additional section beyond advantageous and not advantageous, to say something along the lines of need more information or unable to determine. Because, if we're reading this and we're not fully sure we are interpreting the information correctly, rather than placing it on a scale, I think we should be able to excuse ourselves or be able to say, I need more information in order to really judge where this falls on the lines of advantageous or not advantageous. So that's what I would want to add in terms of updating the evaluation form. Thank you.
That's a great point. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Board Member Ellis. Any other comments or questions from members of the board? We do have a public comment period that will follow after this. So thanks for members of the public that are hanging with us. If you do have questions or comments, we'll get to you shortly. So board members, though, any other comments or questions? I just had one comment. My understanding is it's in the regulations, we will hold one application cycle per calendar year. I'm assuming we're supposed to do that here in 2024 at a time yet to be determined. I couldn't find anything about this, but are there particular requirements around the expenditure of the 3.5 million in terms of how much, by when, this sort of thing? Any conditions on the 3.5 that's currently in the fund?
I don't know, Hannah, if you were gonna jump in.
I can answer that. Sorry, you can hear my baby. This is Isaac also joining the review board meeting. We don't have any requirements for expenditure beyond the commitment to open a cycle annually. And I think we're continuing to work through to see if there are any specific requirements that we need to be aware of for this first tranche of funding, because it's coming from operating funds rather than the alternative compliance payment. So there might be a few different stipulations that we're working through right now.
Okay, thanks for that, Hannah. Yeah, I think the only other comment I'll just add is, like, I think I'm obviously, I think there's more discussion among the board then about how we not just take the feedback form and how we use that, but also on a sort of broader scale, like, yeah, how we like, you know, would we fund a lot of small projects? Would we want to fund a few big projects? Like, I think I'm just throwing that out there as something that would be interesting to kind of talk through as a group, because you know, 3.5, it seems like a lot of money, right? And when you're trying to do this work, it can probably go really quickly. And so would be eager to kind of at some point talk through that once we have these forms. And then I think the process you laid out, Diana, sounds good to me. I do want to make sure there's time for us as a board. Maybe once we have another draft ready for the full comments, maybe at that point we can just talk through as a board just a little bit more about our thoughts about how we approach, you know, the disbursement of these resources. Okay. So we should definitely get to the public comment period. I know you all have been patiently waiting. As a reminder, I want to go ahead and open the meeting to public comment. As a reminder to members of the public, to provide public comment, please raise your hand or type in the chat in the application via the Zoom meeting platform. And if you're calling in and you cannot use the platform, you can raise your hand basically by pressing *9. You can also send your questions to staff via email at berdoreviewboard@boston.gov. There's not a ton of folks here, but let's try to be respectful of our time. Let's try to keep it to 3 minutes per individual. And would love it if members of the public could just introduce yourself and the neighborhood or organization that you represent. So let's open it up to members of the public. Thank you. Maybe there isn't. Any questions or comments, please? And if not, or something comes up later, obviously please email. Welcome to use the chat, or just go ahead and speak up. All right, hearing none. I think I didn't hear. Okay, hearing none. Is there just any other further discussion or questions that people have? I think at this point we can close out this section, but any just last questions or discussion or questions that people might have?
Chair, I may just add, in terms of next steps, it seems like there's agreement in sharing the evaluation form publicly and accepting public input. Okay, great. And then we can come back and and present any revisions that are made at an upcoming hearing.
I think that sounds good. Is there any other, I guess my question is, do any other board members feel strongly that in addition to the feedback form, which is the thing I know the regulations say we need to present for public feedback, the application itself, I guess the regulations there are also pretty specific and clear about what information needs to be provided, but should that also be put out at the same time? Or yeah, do people have any strong feelings about that? Because a lot of our conversation clearly went back and forth between what other information are we going to get and then the feedback, the form itself. So I see you have your hand up, Dale.
Yes, thanks. To the extent that the regulations allow the materials to be shared, then I'm okay with that. I'm fine with the public seeing it. I would just ask, however, that well, want to know if we make this decision now and it turns out that, and we want to reconsider at a future point, is that something we can do as a board?
So is the question about reconsidering just updating the evaluation form if you move forward with it, for example, for one application cycle, but want to change things?
Well, I thought the question was, are we open to having the public view the applications in addition to other documents? And so my comment was, to the extent regulations allow us to share certain aspects of any of the documents, I'm fine with it. And I was wondering, however, is if we decided after trying that it may not have worked well, or we wanted to make changes, do we have the ability to kind of say, well, we will share this, but not this other document? Do you know what I'm saying? Understand my point?
So the question is more around the precedent of sharing things publicly.
Yeah, and if we have the ability to make changes to what we share, or, I'm not saying that it's a good approach to start sharing and not share later, but I'm just trying to figure out what our ability is to make changes, that's all, to what we share.
Maybe before you go, Councilor O'Malley, I just want to clarify what I was asking, which I think I'm okay with sharing all these documents. The question was really more about, do we include, when we release the evaluation form for public comment, also some sort of summary around what the application includes, right? Just some one pager on the application.
Oh, I'd say not the application itself, just a summary.
Correct.
Oh, I see.
Correct.
I misunderstood. Sorry.
Councilor O'Malley, please.
Yeah, no, I think
I'm
board
sorry.
member Moore brings up a really good point. So I guess this would be an appropriate time to ask, we are governed by the open meeting law as a public board. So perhaps at our next board meeting, we could invite someone from the city's corporation counsel's office to give us a 5-minute overview on what the open meeting board entails, because there's a couple of aspects here. What we can deliberate, beforehand amongst ourselves. We want to make sure we're living up to the letter and spirit of the law. And two, we want to have a better answer, or at least I want a better answer, because I'm not sure what it is, in terms of what public documents that are submitted for this fund are then, in the public realm. Is everything, FOIA-able, for example? Obviously, there'd be some redacted things about building utility usage, which would necessarily be public otherwise. So I think that's a good point. And then the last thing is the last subsection on criteria for the Equitable Investment Fund grantees is other environmental initiatives. I might have the language wrong, but we left that so that the board would be able to have a little bit more flexibility on what projects going forward. That's something that obviously, as a board, we can read as narrow or as widely as we see fit. So I think it's a good point. I guess, is that through you to our board members, Mr. Chair? Is that something that all board members would value at an upcoming meeting? Maybe not the next one, but just making sure we have someone that walks us through all these sort of legal questions.
I certainly would appreciate that. it also applies in the context of, we're entering a new year, and I was mentioning to Diana that I was particularly interested in making sure, it's hard when we're meeting on Zoom all the time. I was interested in figuring out ways to build stronger relationships with both members of the board and staff without violating any open meeting law. So I think there are multiple reasons why that would be valuable, and I would appreciate that.
Yeah, I am, if the board seems like there's consensus around this, but I am happy to reach out to council within City Hall and see if we can find a time that they can come and present to the board.
Thanks, Dana. I know it's a short timeline if we're trying to get it. It might not happen for like the meeting in 2 weeks, right? Because that we would have to confirm it by Friday, I think is what you're saying, if we're gonna put the notice out for the next meeting. Is that correct?
Yes, so we post public agendas 10 days prior to the scheduled meeting. But I can reach out tomorrow and see what I hear back.
Okay, thank you. And then I guess we should just resolve, like, are people comfortable in sharing the evaluation form for public comment? And then I think we can circle also back on this other part of the conversation about how we make a decision about the fund. We haven't even set a date yet, so I think there is much more to come. Was that okay with everyone?
I would want to add that I think if you're referring to the application form, so what applicants would fill in to request funds, that would be public anyway, because it will be published so that people could apply to it. So we could certainly have that public. It's not a secret document, not as far as I'm aware. We could, I think if you would want to release a draft application form with this criteria together, we could wait to open public input until we have both, if that makes more sense, or open public input and then come back with feedback and a form, if that makes sense.
I mean, my instinct was, let's have the draft application form and the draft feedback form out together. If there are no other strong feelings about that from members of the board, then I think we should just move forward with the feedback form. But to me, it kind of makes sense to have both for public feedback and comment.
I actually am in support of Chair Massueda's statements there, because I think what just happened on the board very well can happen, publicly. It's like, wait a minute, where's the application? We're talking about an evaluation without what is the application. Like, we see the question in the ordinance, but sometimes I think it would be helpful to just have the form in front of us, in addition to adding in some of the things that Board Member O'Malley and I have already suggested to the evaluation form. So I'm fine with waiting so that both of those things can be made available together.
All right. Any other just comments or feedbacks from members of the board on that? I think.
Chair, if you'd like, I think you could also ask if you want to be have a formal vote on it. Ask someone to make a motion.
Yeah, that sounds good. So let's. I think the plan is then here. We'll hold off on releasing this form, draft the application form, review that, and then release both at the same time for public comment. So is there a motion to support that? Is that clear? It's clear.
I guess I'm hearing motion to hold off on submitting the evaluation for, okay, so then motion motion to hold off on submitting the evaluation form until the application draft is ready.
Second.
Is there a second? Thank you. All in favor, you can either say aye or raise your hand. Okay. Are there any abstaining, any in opposition? Okay, I think the ayes have it. We will hold off and come back to members of the public when we have both forms. All right, thank you. All right, so I think we have moved through those 3 items on the agenda. I think we're now into administrative updates. So Diana, again, thank you. Can you please share any updates you'd like to?
Sure thing. And I'll try to be succinct. I see it's already 6:14. So just wanted to quickly remind folks of key dates coming up. So key BERDO deadlines. May 15th is the reporting deadline for 2023 energy and water usage. The reporting form is slated to open this week on February 15th. So give building owners 3 months to report. July 1st. This is probably a correction from our last key deadlines. July 1st is the deadline for long-term hardship compliance plan applications. And October 1st is the deadline for short-term hardship compliance plan applications. And September 1st is the deadline for building portfolio and individual compliance schedule applications. After 2024, long-term hardship compliance plan applications are due 9 months before the first year the HCP would be used. And short-term hardship compliance plan applications are due 3 months before the first year the HCP would be used. So these specific dates are just for 2024 because it'll be the first year that we implement these flexibility measures. I just want to quickly give an update because it's been some time since we've convened on some of the events that the BERDO team has been conducting. So we've had a series of webinars, one on general emissions compliance at the beginning of the year, one on building portfolios on January 17th, and one on individual compliance schedules on January 31st. All the slides and recordings are available at boston.gov/BERDO. We presented at the Green Ribbon Commission's Cultural Institutions we had a workshop with them actually, with the Cultural Institutions group on January 19th. We had our final community advisory group meeting on January 25th, and we had a commercial real estate working group kickoff meeting on January 31st. The minutes in the slide deck are also available online. And we had a session with the Better City members on February 5th. Upcoming, we still have a couple webinars. They are on Wednesdays from 3 to 4:30. So actually this week on Valentine's Day, we have one for hardship compliance plans. So we're going to dig deep into what is required and what it is. And we also have one for renewable energy on February 28th. We do have a community conversation follow-up on February 15th this week. So we are reaching back out to residents who participated and gave some of their time during the regulations development process to kind of close the loop and report back what ended up going into the regulations. And then we have a healthcare institutions working group kickoff meeting scheduled for February 21st. That's a lot of information. We've been busy. I will also add that there are some new BERDO resources. So as Dima covered today, we have a BERDO emissions calculator. We are offering free assistance in completing BERDO reporting and third-party verification. So we've heard that getting through reporting and getting it third-party verified has been a bit of a hurdle for some building owners. So we are offering free assistance via some funding that the city received, and we're limiting it to building owners who are self-managed residential buildings, small nonprofit owners, or commercial buildings with small business tenants. And so there is an application form. We had a first round close recently and a second round deadline of March 15th. We are also providing one-on-one BERDO consultations. So Dima is doing one-on-one consultations. If you'd like to sign up, there's a sign-up form. And then Dima and Hannah are doing weekly office hours, Fridays at 10 a.m. if you have just general questions that come up. So you can just join. You can just log on at those times and they will be there. And then I wanted to quickly update folks on our two seats that are now open. So the City Council has finalized their designations for chairs of their committees. The new chair for the Environmental Justice, Resiliency, and Park City Council Committee is Councilor Coletta. So just a reminder, one of our seats is reserved for this chair or their designee. So we are working with Councilor Coletta's team to try to schedule an onboarding with the councilor and have her join us as soon as we can get, as soon as is feasible. We also currently have an open position because our former board member, Palmer Dunning, has moved to DC, so he is no longer on the board. So review board member Palmer Dunning was nominated by a community-based organization. So we do need his new seat to be nominated by a community-based organization. And just to remind folks, there was a process to sign up to be a qualified community-based organizations. So these are the groups that can make a nomination for the review board. And that process to be a qualified community-based organization is open every 5 years. So the next time, if a group was interested in becoming one of those groups that could nominate someone, will be in 2028. So for this seat, only these groups can nominate a potential board member. So a nomination form was sent out to these groups, and we are hoping to have, we're going to close the nomination form on March 8th, but prioritizing, accepting applications on a rolling basis and prioritizing any nominations that come in the next 2 weeks. And then lastly, I'll just end on that our next scheduled meeting is tentatively for February 26th. A lot of administrative updates.
All right. No, thank you for that, Diana. Really appreciate it. And thanks everyone for hanging in there. It was a long meeting this evening. But I think we're at the point where did you have a question there, Gail? I see your
Yeah,
hand.
really quickly, because I got confused when I saw the open seat. Then I remembered just before this meeting, wait a minute, I left. Of course, there's an open seat. And I did get the notification of that. Thank you, Diana. And just wondering if there are have you received any nominations so far? I know I just recently saw it, but just wondering.
I did not check today, but when at the end of Friday, there were no nominations yet.
Thank you. That's all.
All right then. So yeah, I might actually reach out to some of these groups and just make sure that folks are working on nominees. You said March 8th is the deadline waiting for? Okay.
Correct, March 8th, although if possible, within the next 2 weeks, I think will be a priority.
Okay. All right, if there are no other just questions or comments about the administrative updates from the members of the board, I think we can move to the last part. We ready? Okay. All right, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All members in favor, please say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the ayes have it. Thank you again, everyone. Thanks to our staff team, members of the board, members of the public. Meeting is adjourned now at 6:21 p.m. Thanks, everyone.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Ready?